Well, thank you for that introduction and for introducing our wonderful panel today. To the audience, thanks for joining us for this first session. And before we get into the meat of the discussion, I'm going to throw some statistics around vishing out there. So there were more than 103 million robocalls in February 2023 alone on US carrier, voice over IP and PTSN networks, according to RoboKiller. 75% of these calls were from spoofed caller IDs. And then taking a look at what US organizations are facing, 77% of US organizations have faced vishing attacks, according to research by Proofpoint. And one final stat, according to Group IB, 37% of vishing attacks are successful. So it is a really important topic that we're touching on today. And I think to introduce everyone in the panel and their kind of thoughts on this topic, with those statistics in mind, why do you think the issue of vishing is so important in today's business world? Peter, perhaps we could kick off with yourself.
Sure. Thank you very much, Beth, and thanks for the opportunity to participate on this esteemed panel. I'm really a strong advocate for learning more about vishing because it is an evolving threat, but it's not new. I mean, we're beginning to now see the media place some importance on vishing, and we hear about these stories, right, of these scams. But vishing has been around for a long time, probably since the invention of the telephone. And if I were, from my perspective, look at how vishing is used in intelligence, this has a direct application to businesses in regarding protecting themselves from the acquisition of proprietary information that can be acquired through vishing or other operational details that are acquired by a threat actor calling into an employee and acquiring some details that will be incorporated into what could be eventually a big breach. I mean, vishing, it's the art of the threat actor being able to impersonate whoever they want to be. It's so much more effective than phishing through email because you actually get the individual on the phone and you can listen to their, what they're saying, their nonverbal cues, their verbal cues, I'm sorry, and you can kind of control that conversation. You can move it around versus if someone's getting something just via email or a text, you don't necessarily know how they're going to react to it. So it's very, very powerful. Individuals can actually pose as, a fellow coworker in another office. They could pose as a boss. They could pose as a vendor or a client or an incoming employee that's really nervous about how they're going to start the position with their company and calling in to someone at that company and using that ploy. I mean, there's a lot of different pretexts that can be used by professional vishers that go way beyond, the typical scams. Scams are very important, and I think that's what's going to get the general public interested in this topic. But for companies, this is a huge threat when it comes to the protection of their proprietary information.
And Lisa, then, from your point of view, anything to add on to that in why it's an important topic to be discussing today?
Yeah, I think from a social engineering perspective, it's more challenging for the potential victim. When we get a phishing email or a text, it's more anonymous. There's less human interaction happening there. It's really easy to hit delete or to report the phish, right? When somebody has you on the phone, we all want to think of ourselves as nice people. We don't want to be rude, right? We want to be polite. We want to be helpful. And so if somebody's really good at carrying on that conversation with us, we almost are conflicted because we don't want to be rude. We don't want to hang up. We feel somehow obligated. We're in this human interaction, and we somehow feel obligated to have a conversation or to bring it to some like polite closure rather than just going click, right? Like it's a little bit harder for us to do that, I think, as humans, particularly if the visher is really talented. If it's clearly, somebody that's obviously trying to trick me and waste my time, it's pretty easy to hang up. If it's somebody who's good at it, particularly if you've been targeted, they know a lot about your organization or about your role, it's really hard for us to kind of take a step back and just hang up the phone. because we're in the middle of a human-to-human interaction.
Yeah, and I
as
think
opposed to a human and technology.
Yeah, and we'll probably get onto this a bit later, but also like when it comes to like reporting these things, because it feels a bit more personal. So I think that makes the reporting a little bit more difficult. So we'll probably get onto that later. Eric, from your point of view, how are like threat actors today using the voice channel? And do any of those statistics that I kind of rattled up at the beginning surprise you at all?
Yeah, the statistics didn't really surprise me, although they are significant. I mean, we know that it's very successful. Now, it takes a lot more time to set up a phishing call than sometimes the phishing emails, right? Where you can just do a commodity shot of 50,000 of them out at once. There's pretexting, there's OSINT that's involved, open source intelligence gathering before phishing. There's a lot more to it. But to Lisa's point, it's also a lot harder for the person on the receiving side to just hang up the phone. Or like with an email, you get an email, and I always tell people, if you have a strong emotional reaction, whether it's a text message, a phone call, or an email, take a deep breath, right? Step back for a minute, maybe even just walk around your desk for a second. It's hard to do that when there's a person on the phone going, I need this done right now, right now. And a lot of times, even the attack vectors mimic what happens in phishing. So you have wire transfer fraud. It's the CEO calling or someone calling and saying, I need you to wire this money right now. We've seen instances where, perhaps they were deepfakes, perhaps they're just voice actors, right? It's the same sort of attacks, but they're very, very effective because you have that human connection. And again, to Lisa's point, we don't want to seem rude most of the time. I mean, I've even hung up on those people telling me my social security number has, been suspended, and I almost felt bad just hanging up on them, right? And it's kind of stupid. We know that it's a ploy, but you still have that touch. Now, the other interesting thing that I always keep in mind with this is the younger generation that's honestly not used to being on the phone nearly as much. They're not as adept necessarily. They're texting all day long. I mean, my kids and people that are younger than me tend to text a lot, where we kind of grew up on the phone, so it's less foreign to us. And man, when you have one of those people putting the pressure on somebody on a phone call to take whatever action it is they're trying to get to go, it can be very, very intimidating.
Yeah. And Kyla, what do you think to that point then about the younger generation maybe not being as susceptible? Do you find that in the workplace that your peers would be equally as susceptible to these kind of attacks? And from an education point of view, are people aware enough of this threat vector?
Absolutely. So on the first point of the generational change, I think it is interesting as this generation shifts to a lot of text-based conversation, the different threat vectors that we do see. I would say that we are kind of more used to that FaceTime or texting, those other avenues. But when it comes to phone calls and all of these threats, really, our generation does have this sort of savviness that when it is emotional, like let's step back, let's not click before we think. And we grew up with needing to have this savviness, or else like we would not be able to, survive on these technologies. So and I think one other kind of development with this generation is we're seeing the growth of these threat vectors become more personal and emotional. For example, the use of AI in these threats. So using AI generated voices to mimic the loved ones that we have around us. That is sort of the scary threat that I think that our generation will have to face, to the extent of deepfakes and these voices kind of calling us and telling us, hey, I'm in another country and I need you to wire me X amount of money, and kind of playing on that, as my panelists have shared, that emotional aspect. Not only do we feel like we have this obligation to be nice and to be cordial with them, but also like they're attacking our emotions, right? And trying to get us to take some action because we have some sort of personal connection. So I think there is a lot of like themes of playing on our care for other people, we're seeing like these text-based scams too do that nowadays, like, oh, click here to fundraise, like donate to this fundraiser, or all these children need your help right now. So I think just walking into the world with a level of vigilance that anything should be questioned before clicking.
Yeah, and Peter, then on that emotional aspect, are you able to expand on that in terms of your experience? And then maybe we could touch on the AI side of things. I'm so keen for AI not to dominate every conversation at the moment, but I think it does just naturally come up.
Yeah, emotion, playing upon the emotions is very, very powerful as an influence technique for social engineering in general, but especially on the telephone. If you can call, let's say, and you pose as being someone in authority, who's going to question someone in authority, especially if the person believes it's their boss? They're going to comply even if they think the instructions are kind of strange, or maybe, I don't know why they're doing it, but they asked me to do it, right? So, pretending to be somebody in authority, sometimes that can be very powerful. Fear is another very, very powerful. If I don't do this, something terrible is going to happen to me. So you decide to do it right away. Scarcity is also something that if I don't take advantage of this, I'm going to lose out on this opportunity, right? So playing in these emotions, especially with Vishing, we can portray those emotions and reiterate those emotions when we get these individuals on the line. So I think that's a factor where we'll get to this, I'm sure, later. But we talk about prevention, as Eric mentioned, you got to kind of like just step back and think, what are they asking me to do? And if they're asking me to do something which could be detrimental if it's fake, that is when I got to really say, wait a minute, right?
Yeah, certainly. And in terms of that emotional targeting, then within organizations, Lisa, do you think certain demographics are being targeted? Are you like, from what you know, are we seeing certain people within departments being targeted, certain seniority levels being targeted, or is it kind of across the board? How is this threat vector being manipulated? Because we know that sometimes phishing emails target specific people, like people in HR by using resumes, people in finance because they know they have a lot of financial information that's sensitive. So is that the same kind of trend we see in phishing?
Yeah, I think so. I haven't looked at the bigger picture, what the data looks like, but I can tell you anecdotally from experience when I was running a training and awareness program that we definitely saw our IT folks being targeted, people who had admin access. We survived successfully a campaign by a Visher who made, I think it was in total, there were something like 600 calls made to our organization. And one of the things that we struggled with was expressing just how serious a risk this is to the organization, to the C-suite, getting executives to take it seriously. They've probably got, a couple of years ago, before the big IRS Vishers were shut down by law enforcement, we were all getting those fake IRS phone calls, and people that obviously had, in most cases, thick accents. They weren't native speakers of English. They were pretty obviously scammy phone calls. And so I think when you talk about phishing in general terms, your average executive who's not a security professional immediately thinks like, oh yeah, those things are annoying, but nobody would possibly fall for those, right? Nobody at our organization is going to fall for it. When you have a more professional campaign than a call center abroad, just calling every number in America that they can get their hands on, pretending to be the IRS, when you have something that's more well executed, more professional, then it's a bigger challenge. So of these 600 calls that we had to our organization, in order to communicate the risk to the C-suite, I just made a pie chart of how many seconds people spent on the phone with these folks that called our IT organization repeatedly. And we had 2 or 3 people, it was like 0 to 10 seconds, people that hung up right away, and then, maybe 30 seconds or a minute. We had a handful of people that stayed on the phone for 5 minutes with these folks. And even though it was a very small number, that's a lot of minutes, right? You can say a lot in 5 or 10 minutes. This was years ago. I don't remember the exact numbers. And when they saw that pie chart, that really brought it home to them that this had to have been, we've got some pretty smart people in our organization, so this had to have been a well-planned, well-orchestrated attack, or, we wouldn't have been spending 5-10 minutes on the phone with the Visher. So I think just having data around it, if you do have an attack in your organization, and being able to express that in a way that's meaningful to the executives, can really help illustrate the problem, a problem that they might not want to take seriously.
Yeah, we often hear about the challenge of the security professionals getting the message up to the senior team to take something like that seriously. So, Eric, anything to add on to how to have those conversations with senior level people? And also, how do you have the conversation that you need to put in a preventative tool? So not just like Lisa's example where there's an attack ongoing, but actually communicating that we need to avoid this happening in the first place.
Yeah, well, one thing that we have to remember, and going off of what Lisa said here a little bit, when you're talking to executives or even certain types of professionals, doctors, attorneys, especially partners, sometimes they are the smartest people in the room and they always think that. So I'm too smart to get hit by this, right? And we're, as security professionals, sometimes we also have a problem with this, where when we look at somebody who made a mistake and we go, how could you fall for something that was so obvious to us? And what we have to remember is they were under the emotional pressure. We are not looking at it from the outside. So we need to make sure these executives understand, A, that these people aren't the kids in their parents' basement drinking Mountain Dew and eating pizza, right? They're pretty good at what they're doing. And we have to make sure that they understand how quickly they can draw you into that. Also, anytime we're talking about executives, especially when it comes to preventative things, we really need to be able to speak their language when it comes to risk. And we need to lay it out to them in the proper way with risk. So as security people, we talk about risk differently than the way the executives do in the C-suite a lot of times. In the boardroom, when they're talking risk, what we say is very different. We got to bridge that gap a little bit. That's where a good CISO comes in and kind of is able to spell that out. So I think education and speaking their language can really help us get across to them how serious it is. You know, Lisa says you show them a pie chart and all of a sudden they're like, whoa. And we know management loves colors, right? So pie charts are always going to be a winner. But that kind of stuff where you put it in something that relates to them, that's how you get them to then react.
And even though it was a near miss, right? Nobody actually gave away any credentials or anything, or did anything that caused any harm. To be able to say to the executives, like, here are the people in the IT organization that have, you know, full-blown admin rights to all these different things, and if they had done X, then Y would have happened. Like, this is what the potential damage is going to look like to the organization. Being able to kind of do that risk assessment and walk them through.
Yeah, definitely. And Kyla, anything to add on to that in terms of speaking to the executives, the wider business about this type of threat?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like just to add off of that last point, I think one thing that can really drive it home are just using case studies and examples of this out in the wild, these types of threats. One of the biggest ones that come to mind is the Twitter hack that happened, where all of these accounts of really big influencers like Barack Obama and Elon Musk were taken over, and there was like a Bitcoin link to donate Bitcoin to this one wallet. So these sorts of threats are super real and they're super visible if you just look for them. And all these case studies and examples can just be can just drive it home that this is something serious that, you know, can even affect an organization like Twitter, which seems like such a big social media company that should have, you know, these huge firewalls around this sort of issue. So the human element can literally affect anyone from your grandma all the way to executives at a company like Twitter. So I would say for it, like, just one takeaway is for everybody to go home and to be vigilant, whether it be your child's device, your parents' device. I think just understanding that the threat vectors are everywhere and affecting everyone.
Yeah, certainly. And so I said we'd get onto AI. Again, I don't want it to overtake the conversation, but Kyla mentioned like AI voice generation, and a lot of people are talking about like deep fakes and stuff like that now. Peter, how realistic is that in terms of accelerating this threat? Is it something that people should really be aware of, or is it something that's being overblown maybe?
I think it's definitely something that people must become aware of this, and it's accelerating at such a fast pace. It's going to have a huge impact. It's already having an impact on the threat of phishing, because it adds credibility, right? First of all, if we talked about what's been around for a long time has been being able to spoof a caller ID. That adds credibility that caller coming in is a particular person that we know, right? And now with being able to clone the voice, is we see the caller ID as this person, we hear the voice, it's like, who's going to doubt that? And the ability to clone a voice now can be done in seconds. I've heard, a month ago it could be done in 50 seconds. Now it's like it can be done in 3 seconds. It's somewhere there in the middle, right? But it's amazing how quickly that clone can be, and how interactive now that voice can be with the recipient of that call. So I think that we're going to be seeing a lot more of that. And there's been some cases out there, you can look them on the internet, where individuals have actually fallen for calls coming in. There was one case, I believe, that happened to a bank manager in Hong Kong. He received a telephone call from who he believed was his client in Dubai. And it was the caller ID from him, and it was the voice. And it requested a transfer of $35 million that would be covered for various acquisitions. In addition to that, they also they fabricated a few emails between the client and the client's attorney to sort of like substantiate these different transactions would be taking place. The bank manager sent the money, $35 million. I think this is in 2020 or 21. And pretty much once that money is gone, it's gone. I think they were able to trace back about $200,000 to a bank in the United States, but otherwise most of that 35 million was gone. And we hear, a few other cases, but what we don't hear, and get back to basically what Kyla said, the importance of these case studies, unfortunately, we don't get enough information from individuals who have suffered those breaches, because it's, and I can understand that they don't want to have everybody know this happened to them, but it's very, very powerful, just like in the world out there with testimonials, hearing someone speak about what happened, why it happened, what did he suffer from it, is so impactful. So the more participation we can get from individuals who have been impacted, so that could be shared with others, I think would be very beneficial. But yes, this is something that's going to be huge, huge impactful.
And just to pick up on something you said there, and something I'm kind of curious of, is, are phishing attacks, do you think they're always packaged with emails as like as that's the tactic, or do some phishing attacks it is just the voice vector that they're going for? Because you said there, like, obviously they followed up with some emails and stuff as well. Is that something to look out for? Is that always going to happen, or is it really just actually it could be a mixture?
In my opinion, the vast majority is going to be that telephone call. But think about the factor though, where you're able to combine some of these techniques, where you get an email first, and all of a sudden you get that phone call. I mean, it adds to the credibility of it making sense, right? So I think it's more powerful, perhaps, use that kind of combination. But I think the vast majority are going to be simple phone calls, in my opinion.
Great. And maybe just one other comment on the AI, because I really want to get on to talking about solutions and how our audience members can start putting in those preventative tools or start educating their workforce as well. So I don't know if anyone wants to just jump in and add anything on that AI point.
I'll throw in something here real quick, and that is, and Peter, I don't mean to counter what you say, but what I've seen as far as deep fakes go, pretty much everything I've heard of could also have been a voice actor at this point. Like, I haven't seen anything that was confirmed that it was a deep fake. Now, to your point though, no, this is a real thing that's happening. And if you look at like the online and the real-time voice changers, I've messed with that stuff a little bit, along with doing the deepfake videos and things like that to get used to it. They are progressing at such a rapid pace. It's only a matter of time. But sometimes they just need a voice actor to follow up on those hybrid attacks, where you send an email and say, I need you to wire $100,000. and then they end up with a scratchy phone call with a lot of background noise from someone who sounds kind of like an executive going, I'm in the airport, about to get on a plane, we need to do this really quick, you know, and it covers up anything that somebody might pick up also. Now, these are very interesting times because I have no doubt that we will really be seeing these deep fake things coming up, whether it's this week or next. But we're also poorly prepared to identify that this was a deep fake as opposed to a voice actor or some other visher who's playing a part like that.
Yeah, so kind of the data's inconclusive. It could have been an AI generated voice. So just on the AI generation, I heard recently that some people were using like voice messages from loved ones that have been deceased to then create like a whole vocabulary library via AI to then speak with this person after they have left them. So it is possible to create a whole vocabulary with AI of a voice when you only have a snippet of that voice itself. So I think it is something that's certainly developing. But now we're kind of halfway through our discussion and we've kind of touched on all the threats and issues around vishing. We kind of want to talk about some of the solutions, I guess. Lisa, you had a really good example of an attack. So with that in mind, what are some of the things that security leaders should be investing in? How should they be educating their employees on these kind of attacks? What are the kind of first steps? What are the necessary tools to be able to combat this type of threat?
Okay. Eric and I are going to have very similar things to say about this, I think. You've touched on it, right? It's education. I think a lot of executives, when, you know, that particular attack that we had, the first thing we did was tell employees about it. And a lot of times, you know, obviously we didn't disclose who spent 5 minutes on the phone with the visher. You know, we protected the victims there. But a lot of executives have a knee-jerk reaction of like, oh, we shouldn't tell anybody about this because we did have people that did the wrong thing, right? They'll have sort of a there's like a shame reflex that kicks in and prohibits them from actually doing the right thing, which is to say, like, hey, you know, we're pretty smart people here at company X, and look, this can even happen to us, right? Like, this could happen to some really smart people. Like, nobody, even security professionals, are above being victimized in this way. So, so I think that communication piece is really, really important, and working, you know, working really closely, having the security team. If you don't have a dedicated training and awareness professional who can forge a relationship with corporate comms and HR and everybody else who's going to be involved in those kind of communications, then, you know, go have coffee with the person who sends out your company newsletter, right? If it's an admin or whoever it is, like, make sure you have relationships there that are already in place, that they understand your role in the organization and what you're trying to do and how you're trying to protect the organization. And so when things like this pop up, that's not the time to figure out, like, okay, what's our positioning on this? Like, what do we tell employees and what don't we? Like, you're in the heat of the moment is when you need to get the message out, not be figuring out like what your communications plan is and who's the one person in the company who's got the ability to, you know, click the button and hit an all company email that goes out to all the employees. That's not the time to be figuring that out. So I think that I can't emphasize enough that communications piece. I would also say, though, not to use fear to talk about it. I don't believe in fear as a motivator. People are tired of hackers and hoodies and that kind of threatening militaristic language and tone. We have enough stress in our lives these days. I don't need the security team to stress me out more. That's not going to help me defend the organization when that visher calls me. So you want to build people up. Education should be empowering. You want to build them up to say, like, you got this. Like, yeah, this stuff is scary and these people are awful what they're trying to do. But we have faith in our employees and you're going to do the right thing. And here's all the things you need to know to help you. I think that tone of caring and being helpful and building people up is is more effective than fear, uncertainty, and doubt, the old FUD message that security people have relied on for a long time.
Yeah, and I think it is, as you kind of said at the beginning as well, it is quite an emotional, it's quite an emotional attack. It's quite personal. You're speaking to someone. So the education also needs to take into account that it is making someone quite vulnerable, really. Kyla, what do you think on Lisa's points? Anything to add?
Yeah, no, I was just thinking about kind of this message that I've always thought about since I started the nonprofit, but this idea that human problems require human solutions, and for us to really come together and build this, what they call a human firewall against these threat actors. And really what that looks like is so for example, when these calls come in and maybe they say it's from your manager or it's from somebody who is a loved one in your life, on the side of that call, try calling that person, put this person on hold or this number on hold, and just try calling or texting that other person and saying, hey, are you okay? Or what's happening? Just to gauge, is this like really legitimate, right? We're just using kind of these basic solutions of coming together as a community. And then another thing I would say is just keep track of digital hygiene and what sort of information and sound bits of your own voice that you're putting out into the world. This was something interesting that I wasn't super aware of or in tune with before the rise of generative AI, but a lot of these solutions nowadays take in data inputs from social media and TikTok videos, going back to Gen Z, of our voices, and podcasts that we've been on, or videos of speeches that we've given at different conferences. And then it uses that voice to generate a fake voice that sounds exactly like us and has the same inflections and tones and accents as us. So I would say on that digital hygiene piece, be really careful the data that you're injecting into the world that could be used as potential data that's used to train some sort of scammer or model. So yeah, human problems require human solutions.
Yeah, I think we're probably all in agreement on that. Peter, anything to add to the how to solve this problem, what to be doing with your staff before the attack happens?
Well, I want to reiterate what Kyla was mentioning about what's out there in social media, and not just the, being able to collect someone's voice sample, but also all that information is out there when a professional human hacker is taking a look at what's out there, and they're going to be able to formulate their pretext, and they know what buttons they're going to be able to push based upon that individual's perceived motivations, vulnerabilities. So the more information that we have out there, the better, the easier it is for a human hacker to be successful in these phishing attempts. So I think one thing is be very careful what you put out there. Some of it's out there already. Be careful, have an understanding of what we put out there. And one simple technique, it sounds silly, but really simple technique is don't answer the phone. Let it go to voicemail. And I tend to do that. I know a lot of people, colleagues, that do the same thing. I might call, leave a voicemail, and it'll call me back within seconds. I know this amount of time that they needed to listen to the voicemail and then call me back. And I think there's more and more people doing that, but that way, if we don't answer the call, I know it's not easy in every situation if we see the number coming in from our boss, but I think we can really put a bit of a barrier there, gives us a chance, listen to that message, and if it's nothing that's really important, they're not, if it's a scammer, probably not going to leave a message, right? They prefer to get you on the line versus leaving a message with a phone number for you to call them back. So I think one technique would be don't answer the phone, get the message.
Yeah, I don't answer the phone, so apologies in advance if anyone's tried to phone me. Send me an email. I'll get back to you. So I'm already taking your advice there, Peter. Eric, I know you're probably going to echo quite a lot of what's already been said. So perhaps some specific advice on what security leaders should advise their staff do if they suspect an attack. I talked about reporting and how that can be quite a difficult challenge for people to overcome, because as we've noted, it is quite an emotional attack. It's not very nice to feel like you've been a victim of that. I think it kind of, you think about like romance scams and stuff, people don't like to admit it because it feels a bit uncomfortable, makes you feel a bit silly. So how can businesses get people to actually report these incidents?
Yeah, I mean, reporting is definitely an important piece of this, because you need to know, like in Lisa's situation where there was a targeted campaign against people in the organization. If people aren't telling the leadership or the security team about that, it can just be ongoing until somebody gets hit. It's really important to share that information. Now, some of the ways that you deal with human behavior, including this, is through policy. Make it easy for them to report it. And we need to work as security professionals on having maybe a little bit better reputation. We're not always known as being the warm, cuddly people you want to call and say, this could be nothing at all, but because we don't always tend to be the most open and welcoming. But we need to work on that so people can call. I've been saved in my situations before. We had an organization I was at that somebody tried a W-2 scam through the email, and the HR director just called me up and she said, it's probably nothing, but it just seems a little odd. Can you come take a look at this? Had she not been willing to call me and waste my time, that could have gone further. You do need policy to back some of this, though, too, so that people know what to do. You're emotional. You're going, okay, I think that may have been, what do I do? Oh, okay, well, the steps here say, even if it's not something, that's cool. Just fire off an email or drop a line to these folks and let them know that something suspicious happened. We have this see something, say something over here in the US, the campaign for that, and it's the same kind of thing. The other thing you can do is you can help empower the people through policies. And this is something we haven't talked about yet. But if you have a policy within your organization that leadership is behind that says on a significant amount of money or sensitive information transfer, confirm it out of band. In other words, don't take the email and just reply and say, is this really you? Because the answer is going to be, oh, yeah, it's me, wink, wink, Instead, you call that person on a number that's in your phone tree, or you contact them in another way and say, sir, ma'am, just want to make sure this was you that requested that. And if your leadership understands the importance, they'll take that 10, 30-second call, whatever it's going to be, and say, yep, that was me. Thanks for calling. Or no, it wasn't me. And it's not a problem. People cannot be afraid to do that. And policy will empower them to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think to Eric's point, if I can expand for a minute, making it easy for people to report. I've talked to numerous security teams where you ask them, like, what is the reporting mechanism? How can people report something? And they'll say, well, it's easy. You go to the employee portal and you click here, and then you click there, and then you go to security, and then you go to incident reporting. Like, your employees know what an incident is. Like, you got to drop the jargon. And then, but it's literally like 5 clicks to get to the center of the lollipop. And guess what? That's not making it easy for your employees. We need to learn something from Amazon and the one-click order button, right? Like, it's got to be super, super, super simple. I've seen some security teams that have 4 or 5 different email addresses for the security team and for different things, which is asking your employee to triage the incident. Right? Like, does this need to go to the SOC? Does this go to this person? Does this go to that person? It doesn't matter. All they need to know is I know how to contact the security team. The triage needs to happen on the security team side, not the employee side. And asking them to even remember what those 5 different email addresses are for those different things, and to know who to contact for what. Keep it really simple. And don't ask your employees to sort through it and figure it out for themselves. Just make it dead easy to report, as easy as you possibly can.
Yeah, I think a lot of nods about that employee portal, and probably a lot of people in our audience know that if they have a HR request and are told to go to the employee portal, sometimes that can be challenging, or if a finance request, that can be challenging. So it can be equally as challenging if it's a security request. So we've had a couple of questions coming from the audience, and one relates to reporting actually, but reporting outside of the organization. So this person asks, can you try and trick or trap the scam callers by talking to them and then send that information to law enforcement? So I guess maybe the tricking and trapping is not advisable. I'm not sure what you guys think, but I think maybe how should businesses report to law enforcement? I know here in the UK, the NCSC has like numbers and stuff you can report stuff to. I don't know what the case is in the States. I don't know who wants to take this. I'm happy to open it up to the floor.
Well, I'll throw in there then. Hey, I like hearing myself talk. I advise not to mess with these folks. And there's thoughts about that, like, oh, I'm wasting their time, so they're not going after somebody else or whatever. But they're pretty good in what they're doing. And, you know, first of all, if you answer a phone call, you're now on a list of these are legitimate numbers, right? It doesn't just go to nowhere. Not that that's a huge deal, because they're still going to keep trying them, but don't ever engage with these folks, because they are sly, they are slippery, and all you're doing is giving them a chance to kind of talk into it. There was a YouTuber who used to love to scam the scammers, Jim Browning maybe. I'm trying to remember the name, but his whole shtick was scamming the scammers. Okay, he ended up deleting his entire YouTube channel because one of them got a hold of him, called him and said, we need to restore a bunch of your videos, and the way you do that is you're going to delete them and then we can restore them afterward. They talked him into this, and he deleted his entire channel. And this is a guy that's used to scamming the scammers, right? This kind of stuff, you don't want to mess around with that. You don't want to put a target on your back. I don't care who you are. The best thing you can do is hang up on them. You know, if you have an option to report the number, awesome, report the number. Let your security people know. But I'm always a big proponent of not messing with these folks.
I would add to that also, Eric, that trying to trick them and trying to report this information to the police is probably not going to really accomplish very much. Unfortunately, the police get so many, reports coming in, and probably what all this ends up being is just compile into a report at the end of the year. These are statistics, right? But for them to be able to act upon it and actually do something to go after these scammers, it is very, very difficult. So you're best off, as you said, just don't answer, or just be able to cut that off and not get drawn into it.
I'll just add, I just add one quick thing. Definitely agree on the point of not engaging with the actors, but if anybody wants a little bit of entertainment, there's a funny YouTuber called James Beach, and he does do this where he replies back to scammers for the purpose, he calls it for the purpose of taking time off of their hands to scam other people, and it's very entertaining. But don't try this at home. Just fun to watch.
Yeah, leave it to the YouTubers who have got the time to be messing about and have got their own risk appetites, I guess. Another question that's come in, I think quite interesting actually. So we've talked about how to prevent it, how to try and tackle it if it does happen, but what about businesses that are contact centers who have to be answering the phone all the time? How at risk are they, and how do they kind of try and mitigate this? Perhaps Lisa, we could just begin with you on that. Any thoughts on that?
Hopefully their organization has a business security officer that can walk through their processes with them. I have a friend who's a BSO for a services organization, a very large, Fortune 50 that's got a services organization, and it's his job to walk through the processes that those call center associates are helping customers with, to make sure that there's no room for social engineering in there, because it happens too much. We've heard the stories of somebody at a call center being victimized, and the damage that can be done to the organization. So I would say if you're in that role, and to your knowledge, there hasn't been any kind of process assessments done to figure out where are the potential weak points in what we're doing, so that we can shore those up, that you ask your security team. if you've got one, hopefully to take a look at, or to, talk to your supervisor, approach the security team, and take a look at, how could we potentially fall victim? What would a good social engineer do if they were the ones that we were taking the call from? It wasn't a legitimate customer, and what kind of damage could be done? It's really a process question, in my opinion.
Yeah, Peter, anything to add on to that? Because we've said, like, don't answer the phone, but obviously for some members of staff, their job is to answer the phone on whether they're a receptionist or whether they're on a call center. Like, there are a lot of jobs that involve just picking up the phone and talking to people.
Yeah, that's very, very true. And I think that's where the policy and guidance has to be more detailed, I think, and provide the individuals with different types of scenarios. You just can't just leave it up to them. Be careful because someone might trick you, but kind of like walk them through a number of scenarios and keep those fresh in their minds. I think that's probably the best thing that we can do in regard to helping them being able to answer the telephone and then being able to separate what is it the individual posing a question that's a common question, or are they trying to probe and get different types of information that's very, very different than your typical telephone call? That should be a red flag right there if it's a strange query.
Yeah, if it's a call, I guess you're not expecting and within your role, that's kind of a red flag. Kyla, anything to add on to that point?
I think the only thing that was on my mind was just if they don't have another form of identification to verify that they are who they say they are, that idea of two-factor or multi-factor authentication, that's always a good check just to make sure that who you're talking to is legitimate. So.
That is our 12:50 call, so I think it's our roundup.
Great, thank you for that, Nicole. So as we've got just 5 minutes left, I wanted to go around the panel and just let you kind of speak to the audience what your key takeaway for them to go away and think about. And I know for Vishing Awareness Week, there's a lot more content coming. So maybe as they're sifting through those seminars and sessions, what should be on their mind, their key takeaways? Perhaps, Kyla, we could begin with yourself. Just 30 seconds.
Absolutely. So rapid fire, I think be vigilant, stay vigilant, and share this message with your loved ones and people in your life who you care about. As we talked about on this panel today, it's a problem with executives, with companies, but it's also a very personal issue. And people will call saying they're your child or they're your grandparent and need help as soon as possible. So just stay vigilant. Note that when you're feeling something emotional, take a step back, take a breather, as we said. And there's so many resources online to help. So you can go to our website and all of these lovely people's websites and resources, but there's a lot of free resources out there to help.
Great point on the resources there. Peter, how about you?
I think that we don't become victims of phishing or other social engineering techniques when we are reaching out to others. We become victims or potential victims when someone reaches out to us, whether by phone, whether face-to-face or by email or text message, etc. That's when how can we know that they are who they say they are? And we can't be so suspicious every time we're so paranoid for every incoming message. But as Eric mentioned earlier, what are they asking us to do? What are the information are they asking? What are they asking us to do, such as making a wire transfer, issuing an access pass? If that is potentially detrimental, if it's fraudulent, that's where we got to take a step back and then decide what we're going to do and maybe notify security.
Great. And Lisa?
I think recognizing that these attacks can be targeted, and with all the information that's available out there, the information that we put out about ourselves, the things we put on social media, plus all the information that's been part of data breaches over the years, all the different data that somebody potentially has about us, can make it really convincing. You can think to yourself, wow, this person knows so much about me, this must be legitimate. But data is cheap and freely available, including information about you and your life. And so So just keep that in mind, that that's not necessarily a good way to verify that who you're talking to, just because they know things about you, that they're really who they say they are.
Thank you. And finally, Eric, your key takeaways for our audience today.
Yeah, the key thing we have to remember is there's not just a single technology that's going to handle this. It's not just the people that's going to handle this. We're going to have to work together on this, especially as technology improves with these deep fakes and things like that. I mean, there are some technologies out there I saw a couple of years ago that listen to people's speech, and sometimes the AI will generate words that our mouths cannot make that sound, right? Letters that pass between each other, but the AI will do that. There is technology being developed for this kind of thing, but this is largely a human thing. We need to make sure that people are empowered and educated on what to look for and what to do if they spot something that just makes them feel weird, right? Just like with email phishing, so often we have that, that weird feeling, or you talk to somebody after it happens and they say, it felt weird at the time, but I went ahead and, we need to make sure people can be empowered to work on that feeling. That's, along with what everyone else has said here, I think if you take these things away, you're going to be much better prepared to deal with this issue.
Amazing. Well, we made it on time. Thank you so much, everyone, for your final thoughts there and for the information you've shared with myself and with the audience today. It's been a real pleasure to hear from everyone. That brings us to the end of this session. I know there's a lot more going on today with Vishing Awareness, so for the audience, do hang around for the next session. But with that, I'll bring everything to a close. Kyla, Peter, Lisa, and Eric, thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to speaking to you all again very soon.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.